Welcome to episode 21 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem and discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. Be aware that none of us are professional philosophers, and everyone here is a self-taught Epicurean. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. Before we start with today's episode, let me remind you of our 3 ground rules. First, our aim is to go back to the original text to bring you an accurate presentation of classical Epicurean philosophy as the ancient Epicureans understood it, and not simply repeat for you what passes for conventional wisdom about Epicurus today. Second, we won't be talking about Lucretius with the goal of promoting modern political perspectives. Epicurus must be understood on his own, and not in terms of competitive schools, which may seem similar to Epicurus, but are fundamentally different and incompatible, such as Stoicism, Humanism, Buddhism, Taoism, and others. Third, we'll be approaching Epicurus with the goal of understanding the fundamental nature of the universe as the essential basis of Epicurean philosophy. From this perspective, you'll see that Epicurus taught neither the pursuit of luxury nor the pursuit of simple living as ends in themselves, but rather he taught the pursuit of pleasure, using feeling as the guide of life, and not supernatural gods, idealism, or virtue ethics. As important as anything else, Epicurus taught that there's no life after death, and any happiness we'll ever have must come in this life, which is why it is so important not to waste time in confusion. Now for today, in this episode 21, we close Book 1 with a discussion of how the earth does not reside at the center of the universe, and how, in fact, the universe, being infinite in size, has no center anywhere. Now let's join our discussion with Elaine reading today's text from Book 1.
For as the animal creation, deprived of food, must perish, and they're quite destroyed, so things must be dissolved as soon as matter, turning from its course, fails to afford supply and saved the whole. Nor, as some may object, can outward blows on all sides given preserve this all of things we see compounded from falling into pieces. They may indeed beat thick and stay some part till other items come and so supply the universe. But often they are compelled to bound and leap back and so afford the seeds both time and place to fly away and thus get their former liberty again. Therefore 'tis fit that many seeds should still arise from time to time for a supply, and that these blows might never cease to beat, the force of matter must be on all sides infinite. In these inquiries, see that you avoid, my Memmius, to believe with some that say all bodies strive to reach the middle place of this great all, and so the nature of the world stands fixed, not struck at all by outward blows, nor can the upper or lower parts be scattered any way abroad, since all things by nature to the center tend, as if you could believe that anything could stay and rest upon itself, that heavy bodies tend upwards and fix their rest upon the surface of the earth opposite to us, just as we see the images of bodies show themselves in water. By the same reason they contend that creatures walk underneath as we above, nor can they fall into the regions of the air below, then can our bodies naturally fly upwards to heaven. And when they see the sun, we view the stars of night, and so by turns they share with us the seasons of the heavens, and with us still divide night and days. But vain mistake hath formed this scheme for fools, who judge perversely of the seeds of things. For there can be no middle, where there is a void or space that's infinite. Or if there was, can bodies for this reason rather stop their course in this medium than take up their abode in any part of space that's further off? For place or empty space, which we call void, must equally give way to heavy movements through a medium, or through none, which way soe'er their motions tend. Nor is there any place where bodies, when they come, throw off their weight and stand fixed in a void and take their rest. Nor can a void support the weight of bodies, but must by its own nature still give way. It follows then that things are not preserved or held together by this means, as if they fondly strove to reach a middle space. Besides, all bodies, they pretend, do not incline towards the center, but those of earth and water, the sea, the rivers rolling from the hills, and those that are composed of earthy parts. But the thin air, they say, and the hot fire are carried upwards from the middle, and hence it is the sky spangled every way with stars, and the sun's flame in his celestial course is fed, because the fire flying from the center there binds up all its heat. So from the earth all mortal things are fed, nor can the trees adorn their lofty heads with leaves, unless the earth to every kind affords its due support. They say a sort of heavenly canopy above covers the whole and holds it in, lest the world's walls, their parts being all dissolved, should instantly be scattered through the void like swiftest flames, and all things be overwhelmed in this great ruin, lest the thundering vaults of heaven should tumble from above, and earth should fail our trembling feet, and the whole race of men, their bodies broken and dissolved, should wander through the boundless void, amid mingles ruins of earth and heavens, and in a moment nothing would be left but desert, empty space, and senseless seeds. For in whatever part you will suppose the seeds to separate, here will be the gate of death to bodies, for matter through the breach will rush abroad and press with mighty force. If this you thoroughly know, and little pains will serve, for one thing by another you'll explain, no more shall darkness interrupt your way, but you shall view the utmost depths of nature, for things will show themselves by mutual light.
And that is the end of Book 1.
Woo-hoo! Amazing.
That last passage in Monroe is, if you will thoroughly con these things, then carried to the end with slight trouble, you will be able by yourself to understand all the rest. For one thing after another will grow clear, and dark night will not rob you of the road, and keep you from surveying the utmost ends of nature. In such wise things will light the torch for other things.
I like the Bailey translation of that as well.
Yes, go ahead with that one, Charles.
These things you will learn thus, let off with little trouble, for one thing after another shall grow clear, nor will blind night snatch away your path from you, but that you shall see all the utmost truths of nature, so shall things kindle a light for others.
So he's chosen to end Book 1 with the statement that the earth is not the center of the universe, which is correct. On the other hand, he has not understood gravity, and he has thought that perhaps if you were on the other side of the earth, you would fall off.
I think it's more than just saying that the earth is not the center. I think he's saying that the universe isn't made of a scheme where things gravitate towards the center of it.
Yeah, that reminds me of what we've discussed last week, too, that it depends on whether we are looking at this as sort of an astronomer and are interested in the absolute truth of it, or whether we're looking at it as a common person who really needs assurance that the earth is not somehow specially created by God at the center of the universe.
Right. I mean, it's both things, but he's not saying the sun is the center of the universe either. That's what I mean.
Right.
It's like there's not, in his scheme, his argument actually goes against anything being a center where everything is pulled.
Right, it certainly does. The part that we read today actually had a little bit of material that maybe goes with what we discussed last week, the issue of how the animal creation deprived of food must perish. So there was a little bit of passage here about how the universe, in order to continue in existence, must have a basically limitless supply of seeds. I don't know if there's anything else in that part that added anything to what we discussed last week.
I mean, there's some minor detail explanations about how, say, an animal decomposes, and he says, therefore, from time to time, there are still many seeds that are, or should still arise. So parts of matter will sort of be recycled time to time, even if that whole hasn't quite wasted away or been used up. Those seeds are still there.
Right. So even though he says that there is no beginning, he's not a Big Bang person. He's not saying that the individual particles have no beginning. He's continually adding, or at least from time to time, adding new particles.
Yeah.
Wait,
Martin, go ahead and say what you want to say there.
where does this come from that the particles would be generated?
Maybe
I know.
you just,
I mean, he says that. I mean, so
Well,
here's
where
the
does he say
Smith.
that?
Here's the Smith version on around line 1050. I insist that multitudinous atoms must rise up out of space. In fact, there could not even be a succession of blows if there were not infinite resources of matter on all sides.
I think he's talking about, though, that new atoms are coming to this part of the universe from another part of the universe. They're not.
Exactly. That's the thing. They're
Is
not
that what he's
produced.
saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
For example,
So
go ahead, Martin.
yeah. So I'm really impressed that even though he is not inclined at all to mathematics, when he thinks about infinity, he gets things right. So in an infinite universe, there is no center. And in order for universe, which behavior which we observe, we essentially need on a large scale, basically an almost constant density of particles around. Now, of course, locally can be big differences, but so that always from further away portions, new particles will come in, and on average, we lose the same number of particles going elsewhere. So this is how these things would work. So there are no new particles made. And this has been stated in previous part very clearly. Nothing is generated from nothing.
Otherwise, it would cease to be infinite.
Right. I
Yeah.
think the wording here, Lucretius, kind of flopped a little bit because he sure does. It looks like it's not clear.
Yeah,
It's not
Elaine,
clear, but that would be inconsistent with what he said before. But it makes it look like he's saying that there's new things.
Yeah, when I'm looking at it in the Daniel Brown edition, his specific example to start this passage was looking to animal creation deprived of food must perish. So he's basically talking about if you've got a bear who has no food, he is going to die. His body will eventually dissipate. But those atoms from his body go somewhere else, and they're
But that's
available.
not what he said. So he says, therefore 'tis fit that many seeds should still arise from time to time for a supply. I think you can't say that. If you look at the whole of what we've read so far, obviously that can't be what he means. But he's wording it poorly. I'm going to criticize Lucretius.
Yeah, the word arise causes problems with my mind. Let's look at the other translations.
Yeah.
I see Monroe says supplied.
Monroe says must rise up. It's that sentence. Wherefore again and again I repeat, many bodies must rise up.
Yes. Okay.
I think and then Bailey must be that many things rise up.
Well, is he talking about there then the issue of up versus down? Because, he is also saying that second passage talks about all things being held together by blows from outside. So maybe he's talking about the difference between blows from outside the thing versus blows from inside the thing.
They've all translated it similar as something rises up.
Mm-hmm.
I just think he messed up. It's okay. No poet is perfect.
There's clearly going to be parts that are less clear than others. And so did you read Martin Ferguson Smith, Elaine, and say what that last sentence said in here?
Yeah, let's see. Let me go.
Did you already do that, or I
that.
apologize?
Here he said, so I insist that multitudinous atoms must rise up out of space. In fact, there could not even be a succession of blows if there were not infinite resources of matter on all sides. So that's even worse looking. It looks like they're translating him to say that the seeds are coming out of the void when he's just spent all these verses explaining how that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I think it's important to point this out because somebody reading it might forget that he's already said that doesn't happen. He's been unclear, and it looks like that's what he's saying here, but that can't be right.
Well, gosh, if there's one thing we've come across in our study of Epicurus is that if you go to one particular isolated passage and read it out of context, then you can end up being confused about what he means. You have to keep the initial premises in view. And clearly one of the first initial premises is that nothing comes from nothing.
Yeah.
And so there's not really new atoms arising from nothing. There's new bodies. There's new when you consider bodies to be
but not new
combinations of atoms. Right.
Right.
So it's interesting that virtually every translation talks about the number of matter, or the number of atoms and particles have to be coming in from all sides.
Yeah, Charles, I'm agreeing with you there. I'm looking at the Bailey version right now, and I'm thinking that this paragraph that's causing us trouble, it seems to be focusing on blows from all sides and talking about sides. So in that context, it might be easier to understand that when he's talking about arising, he's meaning coming from a particular direction as opposed to coming from nothing. It may be directionally focused here as opposed to...
well, we would need to look at the Latin word, Cassius, before we say that. I would be hesitant to just fix it for him without that proving it. So let's see.
It's like in Velleius' section from On the Nature of Gods, where he talks about how the Epicurean gods require, or maybe not require, I don't think that's the right word, how they have a constant stream of atoms flowing towards them.
Right. That's how they sustain themselves indefinitely, is that they can replenish themselves from these exterior streams that have streamed towards them.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that's one of the perplexing parts of that passage in Velleius, if I remember correctly, is because in that one he talks about the atoms streaming towards the gods as opposed to the atoms streaming from the gods. I may be confused about the exact one I'm talking about, but I know that there's a passage within that section.
I do remember that, yeah. Something about the stream of atoms causing the influx of images when we dream.
Right. It seems to be reversed, but that's apparently what the Latin implies. So, yeah, I don't know that I've got easy access to the Latin to talk about right now. Elaine, were you trying to find it?
Yeah, but it's hard. I wish I remembered more of my high school Latin than I do.
Yeah. I need to reread book 4
because the lines are not always in the same place, but it looks like it's around line 1050. So we could probably figure this out, but I don't know if I have time to figure it out right now.
Yeah.
But it looks like that line that begins, or that has et tamen ut plage quoque posent supeteri ipse infinita opus est vis undique materiae. And I probably butchered that.
Well,
Latin people.
This is probably going to end up being one of those things that we should pursue in the comments or in future discussions as opposed to trying to resolve today. But clearly we know that there are not new atoms being created from nothing in the Epicurean universe. So whatever he means here, he doesn't mean that. But what he does mean, like often the case, is not entirely clear maybe to us.
So this is funny, this part about the people are in animals and everything being walking upside down. So this is a flat earth theory that he's arguing against. But really on the earth, on the round earth, that is happening, that there are people right now that are walking upside down to me. But I get the feeling that this was talking about a flat surface, that people were walking opposite to each other. It reminded me of the Upside Down, the Stranger Things, the Netflix series.
I was thinking like a parallel universe of Australia.
Well, clearly we got a big picture issue in Epicurean physics that the Epicureans were not aware of the force of gravity and how planets can generate their own, bodies generate their own gravity. And so you can have locally things do tend towards the center, while in the wider space things do not tend towards a center, and the universe itself has no center. This is why they thought the atoms were just all streaming down infinitely.
We'll get to that. Is that in the next book where he talks about that?
I think he may have already talked about it to some degree. Well, it may be.
No.
You're right, Elaine. I think it's not there yet. That would be the creation of the universe. Yeah. That would be connected with the swerve, because that would be the discussion of where the universe comes into being by the atoms swerving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of falling
about
down.
Motion of the atoms.
Mm-hmm. And, I connect this in my mind, too, with the issue of the size of the sun debate, because people who want to criticize Epicurus are always going to say, ha, 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 he was so ridiculous. He thought you could fall off the other edge of the earth, and he thought the sun was the size of a basketball. Well, he probably got the size of the sun wrong. And I say probably because I would cut him some slack in terms of what the words that we have today actually say. I don't know that we have Epicurus's clear statement about exactly what the size of the sun is, because he talks about it appearing, it says it's the size that it appears to be. Well, if you factor in the variances of appearance, you really don't know what that means.
Well, also, he immediately follows up saying, and in reality, it's either slightly greater than what we see or slightly less.
Right.
For so too fires on earth when looked at from a distance seem to the senses.
Right, he had a good reason for it. The sharpness of items at a distance, he said, if things are really tremendously far away, they always get blurry, except for fire, which tends to not get blurry so quickly. And I apologize for this tangent. The only reason I brought all that up was to say that, yes, there are certain aspects of Epicurean physics that we now see to be incorrect, but not changing the final conclusions. And the reason I'm saying that is, even though there are certain aspects that have to be adjusted, he got many important things right. Like, from the point of view of a common person, I always argue this, and I know you guys completely go along with me on it, but from the point of view of a common person who thinks about gods and his place in the universe and so forth, in my mind, the issue of whether the earth is the center of the universe is just hugely important. Because if the earth is the center of the universe, and if the stars and everything revolves around the earth, then in my simple mind, that means it's very likely there's a God who set it up that way. And so I think a lot of people will be led down that path towards error. But in that problem, Epicurus solves it by pointing out that a good reason why the earth is not the center of the universe, and therefore there is no reason for you simpletons out there like Cassius to think that there's a supernatural God who put everything into that order.
But now, was that even an argument at that time?
I presume it was. Now,
because they weren't into monotheism. They didn't have that humans like the center of the God's creation kind of thing going on back then. So that was a later.
I thought they did.
Common religions back then in like the Hellenistic area were, mostly polytheistic.
Yeah.
But some philosophy, like the Eleatics, and I think, don't quote me on this, but I think even Plato had instances or that the universe was influenced or possibly even wholly created by what we call a demiurge or an artisan god.
But that wouldn't have been the common person's religion the way it was in Galileo's time, when that was a really big deal. I don't think Lucretius was having to face that specific kind of argument. So it would have been useful in those times. It's not really useful for most people now, because most Christians, there are a few that probably think the earth is the center of the universe. There are some that think the earth is flat, but most religious people now still think of things as being human-centric without thinking that has anything to do with astronomy, the way it's set up. So I'd question you on that, Cassius, whether that was Lucretius's.
I may be, what's the word? Is it anachronistic? I may be.
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at it from that point of view.
I'm thinking superimposing.
Mm-hmm. Superimposing. I may be superimposing my own views, but this is, I will be frank and say this is one of the issues that appeals to me most about Epicurean philosophy. Is maybe it's because of my reading into deism and backgrounds and things like that I consider the prime mover argument and so forth all to be variations of just the issue that everything is organized with humanity at its center.
I hate anthropocentrism.
I think this is the infinite universe, and the observation that there can be no center is one of the best responses to that, whether it's made back then or not, or whether it's made today, or whether it's just made in the halls of the simple-minded across the world. But Martin, you haven't said anything. You ever thought about that part?
You basically agree, so that that there is no center astronomically, that really takes out this medieval position on that it was made by God. No? But I also agree, as pointed out, that this is a later thing. This was not at the time of Epicurus and Lucretius.
Geocentric?
Geocentricity, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was Aristotle.
Yeah, I guess I always start the podcast off by saying we're not professional philosophers, so we don't have the ability really just to go out and pull examples immediately to mind and go off on too many tangents.
There were tons of competing theories in astronomy that competed with each other. And like I would say around the time of Epicurus that the most common would be the peripatetic or Aristotelian view, geocentric and all that, because Aristotle believed in a form of gravity, but he wasn't the only one. I mean, you look at the 3rd century, a little bit after Epicurus, Archimedes also believed in gravity, or a form of it. I don't know the name of the person. I want to say 2 or 3 centuries prior to Epicurus and Aristotle and even Plato, who believed in a heliocentric model of the universe.
I just posted a link there for our discussion here to the geocentric model page on Wikipedia. And it says the geocentric model was the dominant description of the cosmos in many ancient civilizations, such as those of Aristotle in classical Greece and Ptolemy in Roman Egypt. And then ancient Greek, Roman, and medieval philosophers usually combined the geocentric model with a spherical Earth. So who was the first who really find that quickly enough to include today? Who came up with, like you said, the sun could be the center of the universe. That surely somebody has that. But who first? Is this around the beginning of the idea that not only the Earth but also the sun was not the center of the universe?
I don't have my timeline for that firmly in mind.
Yeah.
Martin, you're probably the one who's most likely to know that.
The Copernican system and so forth, 1543. This says in 1543, the geocentric system met its first serious challenge. Well, phooey on that, because Lucretius and Epicurus were clearly saying the geocentric system was wrong.
Oh man, I'm terrible with pronouncing these ancient names, or from Sanskrit to English. I am going to butcher this, but there was a philosopher, or he was a mathematician and astronomer, named Brahmagupta, born circa 598 CE and died circa 668 CE. Oh, so I'm thinking of a different... Never mind, that's way after. I was thinking BC, not BCE.
Well, to try to bring it back to where we were, I guess, the point that Elaine has raised is accurate to the point that it's total speculation on my part to say that your average Greek, your average Roman is reaching these conclusions on his own. He's got this preset religious framework that establishes all these other things based on divine revelation and so forth, and not on the issue of whether the earth is the center of the universe or not. I guess it's probably just a certain type of person who is going to try to reason it out.
Aristotle was saying the earth was the center. So part of this could be an argument against Aristotle.
Right.
Let's see. I'm seeing here the heliocentric is the 3rd century BC Greek astronomer and mathematician Aristarchus of Samos was the first to present an explicit argument for a heliocentric model of the solar system. So that would have been after.
So basically, I'm not going to suggest that Epicurus was the first. We don't know where Democritus was or some of the other guys, but this must be among the original challenges to the idea that either the Earth or the sun was the center of the universe.
Yeah, I got my dates wrong on that. Indian astronomer is 1,000 years behind. Oh, well.
That cosmic egg thing? Is that what you're talking about?
No. He lived in like 598 to 668. I misinterpreted. I thought that was BCE. It's not. He was way after.
Okay.
Yeah, the sad thing is that almost everything the Indians came up, there's no primary source left.
I know.
So, I mean, there's a lot of indication. So that they figured it out, but there is no primary source. No, it's like our problem with the Swerve and Epicurus.
Yes.
Yeah, there really is a lot from India that has survived.
But from them we have a bit. No? So of those, a little bit is left.
Very little, yeah. And I think there's a medical text by them that survived in fragments, but I'm mostly concerned about their ethics and their hedonistic, and I don't want to say proto-Epicurean, but there's definitely some resemblance.
Hey guys, let me ask the question or approach it from a different direction. I have my observation about why I think this is so important to Epicurus to point out that the earth is not the center of the universe. But what other reasons might there be for this to be significant to Epicurus? I think we're pretty clear that he's not just writing a general scientific textbook just for the sake of, we're not after wisdom just for the sake of wisdom, and we're not after astronomical knowledge just for the sake of astronomical knowledge. What other implications are there of the fact that the earth is not the center of the universe?
Well, it's possible part of this, because that was a position that Aristotle held, is discrediting competing philosophies and pointing out ways in which they were inaccurate.
Maybe. Epicurus never really struck me as much of a contrarian for the sake of contradicting Plato. I would say that it has to do with his insistence of the many worlds in his letters. I think to Pythocles and Herodotus.
Now, you're going to get me started again on the issue of many worlds also being of major interest, because it shows that we're not the special pets of God. I always bring everything back to that particular question.
I think you kind of captured what I was getting at.
But Charles, don't let me cut you off. What other implications do you see of this? Clearly, he's got to inoculate his students against the positions of other schools, and what Aristotle and maybe presumably Plato had taught would be something that he'd want to comment on. So I agree with you that he's not primarily just a contrarian, but if there are major premises that his students had been taught in other schools that he thought was wrong, he is going to want to correct that. But are there other implications of this that we might be overlooking or that we ought to discuss?
It wouldn't make sense in the context of the Epicurean gods.
It would not make sense for the earth to be the center? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and for humans to also be at the very center.
So looking in Martin Ferguson Smith, he says that there's an argument that Lucretius is arguing against the peripatetic. That's the Aristotle people.
Yes, okay.
Okay, but then Martin Ferguson Smith thinks that he's also targeting the Stoics. So we have to remember Lucretius was after Epicurus, so he can attack people that weren't available to attack for Epicurus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because clearly with the rise of Stoicism, there would have been much more challenge from that direction that Epicurus himself had not had to face.
So I think it would be consistent. I found out when I read DeWitt that how many of the specific principle doctrines were not just assertions of, okay, this is how it is, but they were also arguments against specific rival positions. So I actually think he did a lot of that. And if Martin Ferguson Smith says that is a view, I think we should at least consider that may have been the purpose of this.
Oh, I'd certainly agree that there's part of that going on here. Okay, here's an example, and I'm not sure I can articulate it well, but what about the issue of, if he's kind of again, we were talking earlier about the directional aspect of the atoms. Maybe another implication of this is, since things are not tending towards the center, they are also dispersing. Maybe this reinforces his conclusion that there are no eternal bodies, that everything is going to eventually at some point decompose, dissipate, be destroyed, including the earth. Because I know that he's going to go into that part more specifically as we go forward in the coming books, that the earth itself is not eternal. So maybe this is a preliminary to that observation.
Yeah. Also, I think that coincides directly with how there can really be no center if the universe is always expanding and if it is infinite.
Again, just trying to organize it in my mind. I don't know that this has any direct implication for the mechanism of pleasure, but the orientation of Epicurean philosophy towards the dismissal of supernatural gods. That's what I've been trying to hammer today, is how it undermines the idea that everything was created supernaturally. What are the other premises of Epicurean philosophy? That there's no life after death. Maybe that's where I'm going with that last point I just made, that since everything doesn't tend towards the center and constantly be replenished, eventually things do end. Go ahead, Charles.
I guess if we're going along that route, it also wouldn't make sense if we were the center of the universe. Basically, us being at the center would imply that it would be by design.
Right. Okay, so maybe you're saying there that it might not necessarily be a design by a supernatural God. Maybe there's some other source of design in the world. He's making a flat point that there is no design of any kind.
Yes.
I think we're reading stuff into it. I think this is another superimposition. I think it's useful in some ways now, maybe, but I don't think, I think if he had wanted to say that, he would have said it.
So, Elaine, obviously you've got a direction of thought here. What other implications of your direction do you see?
I don't think he's going that way because I think he would have said it because he's been pretty clear about who he's arguing against. I think he's pretty clearly arguing against current philosophies. And look at this 1067. But vain mistake hath formed this scheme for fools who judge perversely of it. He's pretty down on rival philosophies, Lucretius is, and I think we have evidence that Epicurus would like to insult them. I think look, this is stupid. It cannot work this way. And it takes apart the rest of their philosophy. I think you're making stuff out of it that's not there.
How does it take apart the rest of their philosophy?
Well, if you have a philosophy that is consistent and coherent, if you make a serious mistake in part of it, everything that you've built on it will be wrong. Now, we have seen that even though Epicurus and Lucretius didn't have the understanding of gravity, we don't all completely understand gravity, but if they didn't know anything that we know now, then it didn't undo everything. But there are some bricks that you're building your building with. If they're messed up, things will not work. And in fact, in the conclusion here, this last line, these things you will learn, thus led on with little trouble, for one thing after another shall grow clear. If your one thing that you're building on is wrong, the rest you're going to be going the wrong direction. That's how I would take this.
Okay. Any other implications of this section for daily life in 2020? Well, it's pretty clear that the conclusion here is that the Earth or the sun is not the center of the universe, and that in fact the universe as a whole does not have a center. Is there anything that we haven't covered today that we ought to observe about how that fits into Epicurean philosophy?
In any system of philosophy that is anthropocentric, there's usually other arbitrary or supernatural or even religious explanations behind physics and astronomy. But for those that aren't, usually we have this element of chance or free will, as well as an emphasis on, I don't want to say an emphasis on science, but like Epicurean philosophy is not anthropocentric, and there's no reason to believe that it could be. And I think that believing that humans are the center of everything is a bit arrogant.
More than a bit, in my mind.
Well, okay, I don't have a problem with arrogance but is it wrong? Yeah, it's probably wrong. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it doesn't offend me like on a virtue basis. It's just not right.
You see lots of graphics and memes on the different parts of the internet with some representation of the hugeness of space, and then you've got a little speck here, and you've got an arrow that says you are here, which is always kind of addressing, I guess, Charles' point. And I don't particularly like those myself because it's kind of demeaning as well.
It's not. It's not. Far. I don't think it's meant to be humbling. I don't want to get at that.
Yeah, that's what I was. When you said arrogance, I was thinking about like humility versus arrogance. That gets to be kind of one of those social virtue things, and I don't know, it doesn't bother me, but it's just not right.
Well, we're kind of in the concluding mode today, it seems like. Mm-hmm. So, Elaine, you've got a lot to say today. Where would you begin to frame some concluding thoughts?
I would conclude where Lucretius concluded, that one piece of understanding leads to another. And so make sure that your building blocks of your philosophy are right, and you keep going with the tools that you're getting from Epicurus, and you're more likely to go in the direction that's accurate, and then you can make accurate choices.
Martin?
Oh, yeah, I don't have much of a summary. I rather want to come back to this arise. Huh? So I checked a bit in the dictionaries, and there is a reading which means just to come. No? And so that's why I don't think that we necessarily have to read this text as if the particles which are new in a certain area have been formed there. It's really that they come from where we didn't see them before. So I think this arise in this case emphasizes we were not aware of these particles before, because they were too far away, and then they came to replace and statistically replace those which we lost.
So maybe the problem is in the translators, that all of the translators that we've got have made the same mistake, which is kind of funny. That does happen, you know. You get an expert cascade and everybody will misread something the same way. Well, good.
I can't find a good immediate example of this, but I know in some translations, especially in Book 1, there is a phrase that has always interested me about how things, I think rising is part of the phrasing, but coming to the shores of light. I don't know if anybody else remembers that phrase, but it always struck me that there is something about shores of light that, as if almost there's a beach or something that was significant in the way they were describing things. And I don't know whether that relates to the arise or rising or whatever, but anybody have any thoughts on why you would end Book 1 at this particular point?
I would need to see Book 2 to see the
right.
difference.
I was about to say that.
I was gonna,
to say that. Yep.
Well, we can spend just a second at least in looking at what the topic is at the beginning. Of course, Book 2, as with most of the books, starts with another general discussion of Epicurus and general ethical issues. So for those people who are a little bit tired of hearing us discuss the atoms, we're going to be going in the beginning of Book 2. We'll go back to some major ethical perspectives about the significance of Epicurus for a little while.
Well, I was going to say that Book 1 sort of establishes the tone for the rest of the book, as well as getting the point across that before we get into ethics, the groundworks or the foundations of the physics have to be established first. And a huge part of that includes dismissing religious superstition.
Right, it does. But as far as why stop right here, I'm looking at the beginning of Book 2, and it looks like as soon as he finishes his opening discussion of the ethical significance of Epicurus, he goes back almost immediately into the same train of thought we're discussing now about how bodies break up. I guess that's going to be the next part, is how bodies come together and break up, it looks like.
Well, that's what we were mostly confused on today.
Right. Well, we will have a break, though, because we'll be discussing the well-known sections about how Epicureans can look down from the hilltops at the wandering men in error as to how to live their lives and how great a value it is to understand the benefits of not doing that. It is sweet when on the great sea the winds trouble the waters to behold from land another's deep distress. Not that it's a pleasure and delight that any should be afflicted, but because it is sweet to see from what evils you are yourself exempt. The opening for next week, which is very well known.
I think that's it from all of us.
Okay. Elaine, any final thoughts?
No, I think I've given mine.
Okay, great. All right. Well, it probably should be marked that we've finished Book 1. I very much appreciate all the participation from you guys. It's been tremendously valuable for me, and I hope our listeners have gotten some things out of this, and we will continue on next week.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.